Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for Week 11. I'm intended for half PPR leagues on this channel, and we're also going to start with the players unranked due to bye. We have the Buccaneers, the Giants, the Cardinals, and the Panthers on bye. So Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Malik Neighbors, Wanda Robinson, Darius Slayton, Xavier Legette, and Adam Thielen are all unranked. There's also some players out due to injury. Chris Olave is on IR, and so is Stephon Diggs, Christian Kirk, Brandon Ayuk, Rashid Shaheed, Rashee Rice, Marquise Brown, Bub Means, Alan Lazard, Brandon Cooks, and Josh Reynolds. We also know that Keon Coleman is already ruled out for Sunday against the Chiefs, and T. Higgins, who's missed 3 games, questionable for Sunday night. I did not rank. At the moment, I don't think he plays. He didn't practice on Wednesday. Michael Pittman also missed last week. I think he'll miss again. And so did Cedric Wilson. I didn't rank him either. So every player here on the screen is unranked. You cannot start any of them in Week 11. But at number 1, you know for a fact you are starting Ja'Marr Chase. He is the wide receiver 1 this season, and last week was the most dominant performance we've seen all year. 260 plus yards, 3 touchdowns. No one is benching Ja'Marr Chase. The matchup was elite. It's not as good against the Chargers, but obviously he's wide receiver 1 in the ranks. Number 2, I am starting Deebo Samuel with absolute confidence this week. I expect some pushback in the comments, but the matchup against Seattle is top 3 in the last 5 games. Although they are coming off a bye, they have given up 34 points per game to the position. 14.8 catches, 180 yards per game to the position, and 7 touchdowns allowed. They are absolutely a big upgrade, and I think last week's usage was a bit matchup specific. If you recall, before week 6, the first time Deebo played Seattle this season, he was really bad against Arizona the week before, while Brandon Ayuk had almost all the targets and had his best game, his only good game of the season. Meanwhile, on Thursday night, right after that, against the Seahawks, Deebo went off as he always does against Seattle. In 8 career games against the Seahawks, Deebo has over 100 yards in 6 of them, and also 8 total touchdowns. He is a lock to find the end zone. If you look at the last 5 games specifically in the regular season, Deebo's averaging 22.5 fantasy points per game, 8.4 targets, 6 catches, 123 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He owns the Seahawks. So I'm expecting more of the same. Kyle Shanahan will showcase him. And after he got so pissed at the kicker last week, he probably takes matters into his own hands and scores touchdowns, prevents the field goal attempts in the first place. So I expect at least 1 touchdown, if not 2 from Deebo. That is a guarantee. And these last 5 games with 22.5 points doesn't even include the playoff game with 165 yards and a touchdown. Deebo will be elite on Sunday against Seattle. He is my start of the week. At number 3, almost put him above Deebo. It's A.J. Brown versus Washington, who also dominates this matchup. The Commanders cannot stop him. In 3 full games versus Washington, A.J. Brown has 5 touchdowns and 130 yards per game. He's fucking so elite against the Commanders. But this matchup has definitely turned it around this season. In the last 5 weeks, they actually rank bottom 5. Dan Quinn's coaching is working. But they just traded for Marshawn Lattimore. He will be inactive, already ruled out for Thursday. And there isn't that extra added piece of an elite corner. So although it's a downgrade for sure, they still have given up 2 touchdowns the last 5 weeks. And I think A.J. Brown will continue his elite performances against the Commanders. I expect that will continue. So last week's usage for everyone was strange. It was a blowout win versus Dallas, and they definitely cared a lot more about being healthy for this game against Washington on Thursday. So don't really care that some weird backups like Aniyah Smith and Johnny Wilson, those rookies, got some work. Same with the running backs like Will Shipley and Kenny Gainwell got involved. You're not panicked about Saquon. Don't be panicked about A.J. Brown. So he will dominate. I think 20 plus points is a guarantee for each of the top 3 players. This is the elite tier for Week 11. Ja'Marr Chase, Deebo Samuel, and A.J. Brown. Number 4 is a tier down, but still a lock in your lineup. Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Jacksonville, who's a top 6 receiver the last 4 games, but it's not thanks to volume. Only 6.3 targets is not that safe, but he's catching pretty much every single one. Very few drops. He usually catches every single target, 5.8 catches per game for 59 yards, nothing special in terms of yards, but 4 touchdowns. He always scores touchdowns. He is on a 7-game touchdown streak, and this week it will definitely hit 8. The Jaguars don't scare you. Even if it's just like that Titans game where they won with 50 points on the scoreboard and Goff threw less than 100 yards, St. Brown will still score a touchdown. That is a guarantee to happen. I think he scores a touchdown every single week rest of season. I think that's going to be one of the little nuggets that gets him all-pro status this season. A touchdown every single week dating back to week 3. Number 5, no one is benching Justin Jefferson either, but last week we saw some cracks in the armor for Sam Darnold. Definitely some red flags cropped up. If Darnold continues to play poorly, then Jefferson might be limited. But in general, he goes over 100 yards, and his last 4, he's still averaging 96. So even though the touchdowns are not anywhere near as safe as they are with St. Brown, he is right behind him as wide receiver 7 in points per game, averaging 14.5 the last 4 weeks. You thought it would be better, but Darnold is just not quite as good as Kirk Cousins, and that's the risk we kind of expected entering the season. The reason why he wasn't wide receiver 1 in the ADP entering this season. So this matchup's bottom 10 on paper, but their secondary is actually very injured. Their top 3 corners missed last week, and Snead has missed like 3 straight games. So not expecting the worst here. I think Jefferson will be fine, and the Vikings probably dominate the Titans. Jefferson will get back on track. No one's benching him in the first place. Number 6, another player who's a lock in your lineup, if active, would be Nico Collins at Dallas, and I got screwed. I had no options on the bench to pivot to. Cedric Tillman was on bye, and on Sunday night when he was ruled inactive, I got the bagel from Nico Collins in the subscriber league. So that might cost me a tiebreaker at the end of the season. Points scored probably keeps me out of the playoff picture if I am tied for that final playoff spot. So wish me luck, but I am livid about Nico Collins. I really was upset. I thought he would play on Sunday. So he better play on Monday. There's even fewer options to pivot to if that happens again. If he's ruled out, you would probably have to look to Jake Ferguson, Jalen Tolbert, and maybe John Mechie, who did score a touchdown in his absence last week. So that would suck, but this matchup is top 10, and if Nico does play, he probably returns to elite status immediately. Before he went down with a hamstring injury, before he went on IR, he was giving you 19 points per game, 113 yards on just over 9 targets, 6.5 catches per game. So CJ Stroud is really going to be happy to have him back. Without Stephon Diggs, this volume probably goes up, and Nico will be an elite play once healthy. Let's hope it's this week. Number 7, it's Puka Nacua at New England, who you could argue should be ranked inside the top 2. He had 14 targets last week, and finally, it is confirmed. That's the volume you should kind of expect from Puka every week. When I was piecing together some of his early season stats, he never played a full game, so it was just like 57% of snaps in this game, 35% in this game. He also put up 14 targets in about 95% of a single game snap. So I was like, maybe that's actually what he's going to get. And last week it was confirmed 14 targets went to Puka. He finally played a full game. So as long as he doesn't get ejected again, as long as the knee injury doesn't crop up again, Puka's a guaranteed stud every week. The volume locks in the floor. He probably goes over 100 yards every single week. So start him for sure, but he's still yet to find the end zone this season. Last week against the Dolphins, though, was a weird game, and it probably fixes itself immediately. But until it happens, I won't rank him top 5. He's still only averaging 9.2 points per game this season. So that's the red flag why I can't put him above. Once he finds the end zone, though, I could rank him top 2. That's the only thing missing for Puka. Number 8 would be George Pickens. Other than Deebo, my other start of the week. Versus Baltimore, it's clearly the best matchup in the NFL. For receivers, they are getting torched in the secondary. The Ravens give up 40 points per game the last 5 weeks, 15.4 catches, 216 yards, 9 touchdowns over that span. Obviously, 3 of them did just go to Jamar Chase, but still against everyone, they get dominated, and Kyle Hamilton is questionable, might be out. So a terrible secondary probably gets worse, and I'm actually more concerned about Lamar Jackson not playing well than I am Russell Wilson in this matchup. The defense is far more difficult on the Steelers side than the Ravens side. So Pickens will play well. Last season, he had 2 games against Baltimore that were completely on polar opposites of the spectrum. A bagel in week 18, that was concerning, but that was with Mason Rudolph. The other game in week 5, he had 10 targets, 6 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown. He was dominant. I believe Deontay Johnson was inactive for that game as well. So he will play, I think, closer to this game this week. The Ravens defense shouldn't scare you at all. If anything, it's a massive upgrade, even though this divisional rivalry gets difficult most of the time. So it could be a very low score game. I could be wrong here, but Pickens is that yak type of option that could put up 70 yards on one play, and I think one of those deep shots does hit this week. I think the Ravens give up a lot of yards to Russell Wilson. So Pickens a must start. Definitely expect 8+ targets and 100+ yards from Pickens this week. Number 9, I'm still starting CeeDee Lamb versus Houston, but obviously he gets a big downgrade without Dak Prescott. The ceiling is just not the same with Cooper Rush, and last week he would have at least scored a touchdown if not for the sunlight. I think it would have hit. So I'm at least willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not ready to fully panic because the matchup was also terrible against the Eagles. The Eagles are the worst matchup as of the last 5 games for receivers. So I'm not totally writing off Lamb as a top 10 play, but obviously I'm concerned. I understand if you think this is too high. The Texans, though, are a top 4 matchup on paper. So completely opposite end of the spectrum, far better of a spot than against the Eagles. So he should play well. They give up 156 yards per game and 8 touchdowns to receivers the last 5 weeks, an average of 31.7 points per game. And you know there's no other threats to get those targets in this offense, so he will still get 10+ targets no matter what. And thankfully it's a night game, so the sun is not a problem. So there could be a yo-yo pattern with the Cowboys offense this season. In fantasy, I think they might have one bad game and then one kind of bounce back game. In primetime, I don't think they lay a complete egg, but it is possible the Texans did shut down Jared Goff in the first half last week. So Lamb is a toss-up, but I'm willing to give him one more week before I completely jump ship. I still have him at number 9. I think you're starting him. The matchup is top 5. Number 10, I think you're starting Cedric Tillman at this point. In 3 games with Jameis Winston, basically his only 3 games in his career, he's been insanely good. 16.5 points, ranks as wide receiver 3 in that sample size. 10.7 targets, 7 catches, 85 yards, and 3 touchdowns in those 3 games. Massive floor and high upside. Jameis usually finds him in the end zone. So love Cedric Tillman. He's been a revelation. I don't really understand why they didn't use him sooner, but it took trading Amari Cooper to get him on the field consistently, and he has been amazing filling in for him. So love him. He also gets a top 5 matchup similar to CeeDee Lamb. The Saints give up 30 points per game to the position, 12.2 catches, 170 yards per game, and 5 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks. If there's one player in this offense I trust to score, it would be Cedric Tillman. So he should be dominant from a yard standpoint, and I think he finds the end zone. Tillman should keep up this 16-point average. I think he's a must start this week. At number 11, I'm downgrading Terry McLaurin outside the top 10 because this Eagles matchup, as I mentioned earlier, is elite. In terms of difficulty, that is, it's not a good spot to be in at all. Definitely a downgrade. We saw them shut down CeeDee Lamb last week. They rank worst in the NFL, only giving up 14 points per game to receivers in fantasy the last 5 weeks. That is dead last matchup you can find. So 82 yards per game, definitely scary, definitely concerning. Only 1 touchdown as well is a big red flag. So I'm concerned about Terry, but he's been so good this season. I still think you have to start him, and this is as low as I can go. He also plays very well in this matchup. Historically, we know the quarterback play has been bad, but he still averages 88 yards per game on 10 targets, about 7 catches in his last 5 versus the Eagles. Only 1 touchdown, though, I think with Jaden Daniels that will go up, but even without it, you're getting about a 12-point floor from Terry his last 5 versus Philadelphia. So he should be okay. I think similar to A.J. Brown, even though it's a tough matchup on paper, I'm not going to downgrade him that much. In this divisional matchup, these stud receivers usually play well. So start him if you have him. I'm not benching Terry at all. Number 12, I have Garrett Wilson, who's still a player I think you are starting no matter what. When he plays well, he goes off and is fantastic. So he's too talented to bench. He could have another highlight reel catch, and you wouldn't be shocked. But obviously, this team is still very, very bad. So there's going to be some terrible games like we saw last week where the offense is just dog shit, and they go on bye after this. Hopefully, they get things in order after the bye. But in general, you're not trusting the Jets at all. It's just the hope that they're so good in garbage time or some type of deep shot hits for Garrett Wilson that it compensates for the risk. So he's been a top 10 receiver the last 4 games, averaging 13.6 points. There is some volatility, but I'm still starting him. I think he's earned your trust. He's one of the best athletes at the position. At number 13, I have Zay Flowers at Pittsburgh, who last season was not very good in this matchup. He had one terrible game, but I don't think he was fully healthy. In week 5 against Pittsburgh, though, last season, he had 9.8 points, 11 targets, 5 catches, 73 yards, no touchdown. And that kind of resembles a stat line we've seen from him a lot this season. 10 plus targets, no touchdown, but high yards. And this year, he's gone over 100 a lot of the time. And I don't expect Tylan Wallace to go over 100 yards again. I was literally like, who the fuck is Tylan Wallace last week when he was dominating the Bengals and vulturing those deep shots from Zay Flowers. So that should probably pivot back to Flowers this week, and I'm still going to start him. He is wide receiver 14 over the last 4 games, averaging 12.8 points per game on about 77 yards per game as well. So we know it's either 100 or less than 50 with Flowers, but he's earned your trust. When he pays off, he's too good. You're going to be more upset benching him in that scenario than starting him if he disappoints. So yeah, there's some risk with Flowers. It's not the best matchup in general. Lamar does not play well against Pittsburgh, but still I think I'm going to start Flowers. I'm trusting him this week against the Steelers. Number 14, I got Darnell Mooney followed by Drake London at Denver, the 2 Falcons receivers back-to-back. And yes, I am ranking Darnell Mooney 1 spot above Drake London because they've been almost mirror images of each other. The volume has been very similar. They both had like 96, 97 yards last week against the Saints. And this week, London gets the Patrick Surtain matchup, so I'm expecting a downgrade for him compared to Mooney. I think Mooney will capitalize a little bit, get a bit more open, and you know Cousins finds him every week. Mooney is averaging 13.3 points in his last 4 games, 79 yards per game, keeps the floor very high, touchdowns probably hit once again. And London is not far behind him, averaging 12.1 points in his last 5 games. One of those games he exited first quarter, but he also scored a touchdown, so I'm giving him a larger sample size, but still 12.1 points is tied for wide receiver 16 over the last 4 weeks. So they're both in the top 20. They've both been great, and they both put up similar numbers most of the time. So I expect similar stat lines. Because London gets a downgrade, he's not top 10 this week, but right behind Mooney, he's still top 15, definitely still a receiver you're starting. He's earned must-start status this season. Number 16, DeAndre Hopkins at Buffalo. Also at this point, I think a must start. He's the clear number 1 receiver, obviously behind Kelsey. But for Mahomes in this offense, that is all you need to know. So the upside's always going to be there. There's going to be touchdowns most of the time. And in this game, there's potential shootout chances against Buffalo. But the Bills are very injured on their offense. So it could be another 20-point victory for Kansas City. But if they have to score over 30, you know Hopkins will get a shit ton of volume. So even though Juju Smith-Schuster will return to the field this week, I still trust Hopkins as a must-start top 20 play. At this point, there is a little bit more risk entering the equation, but the floor should be fine. In his last 3 games with the Chiefs, Hopkins is averaging 12 points per game, and he could have 2 touchdowns once again. So start him if you have him. The matchup's top 12. I'm not worried about Hopkins against the Bills. But another savvy veteran I'm not benching would be Cooper Kupp at New England. It's pretty clear that Puka is the alpha. Puka will get 10 plus targets every single week. Kupp might disappear from time to time, but I think it's going to be matchup dependent, and this Patriots secondary doesn't scare you. So I still trust the floor for Kupp. I think he probably finds the end zone. He's been safer to do that this year than Puka has been, but at some point the Demarcus Robinson touchdowns will pivot to other players. So Kupp, I think, is still a top 20 play, but I think the floor is mainly what you're banking on. He is averaging 11.4 points per game in the last 4. So that's still a top 20 receiver. I still trust Kupp this week against the Patriots. Number 18, I have Tyreek Hill versus Las Vegas. And when you hear the Raiders as the matchup, you expect it's a good spot. But on paper, it's actually a big downgrade. They rank bottom 2 against the position. Last 5 games, Las Vegas only gives up 18.6 points per game to receivers. And that's on less than 100 yards per game to the position, but 3 touchdowns as well. Very poor odds in fantasy against Las Vegas. So kind of a shocker. I wouldn't have expected that to be the case, but it is. I'm going to trust those stats and not give him an upgrade. And let's face it, he's been terrible. The wide receiver 45 in his last 4 games is bad. 8.1 points per game from Tyreek Hill the last month. And last week, he finally found the end zone again, but it didn't really matter. He still didn't go over 10 points. This offense is strange. They got the win. That's all that matters. But maybe they're going to start winning with defense all of a sudden. I have no real confidence that Tyreek is actually going to get the volume necessary to work out. But given it's a home game against the Raiders, I still think Tyreek Hill is a good play. We've seen him torch the Raiders when he was a Chief in the past, and although they're off a bye, I do expect Tyreek to inevitably get going again. He's just too fast to ignore, and although Jalen Waddle could maybe be the start in this game, Malik Washington probably doesn't vulture him again. So Tyreek Hill's still the wide receiver in Miami I'm starting, but I get it if you're going to bench him. He's been so frustrating, but based on name value, I'm going to give him one more week in the top 20. But maybe this Raiders matchup is legit, and I should be absolutely writing him off. If he shits the bed, maybe that's the reason why. At number 19, I have Tank Dell at Dallas, who I think is worth a start. But just like Tyreek Hill, he has been averaging pretty bad numbers. The wide receiver 44 in points per game, only 8.2 the last 4 weeks. But last week, John Mechie scored a touchdown. That's probably not going to happen that often. So Dell will get back in the end zone soon enough. And if Nico Collins does return to the field, I actually think that helps Tank Dell tremendously because the matchups won't be as difficult. He's not the biggest guy on the field, and he can get shut down, potentially shoved around as well. Maybe some press man coverage shuts him down on occasion. But Tank Dell should be fine once Nico Collins is back, because Diggs is still off the field. Diggs is not coming back. He's on IR for the rest of the season, and this matchup is top 10 against Dallas. In primetime, I think Stroud turns it around finally. So Dell, I think, is a good play. At number 19, I'm still going to start him. On Monday night, I think both Texans receivers have good games. Number 20 is Calvin Ridley versus Minnesota, who I want to trust. He's averaging 14 points per game the last 4 weeks, and the volume is there. 10.3 targets is legit. Definitely a safe volume headed towards Ridley every week, but only 5.8 catches. It's ticked up a little bit lately, but part of that is still very unimpressive. That's terrible catch percentage numbers for Ridley, and he's turning that into 86 yards and 2 touchdowns, but both touchdowns happened last week. He also fumbled recently, so he is the wide receiver 9 in that sample size, but without the touchdowns, I don't quite buy into it. It could definitely fall apart very quickly. So buyer beware with Ridley. At some point, he will burn you, but he gets a top 6 matchup here, and I'm willing to trust him one more time. But I do really worry that the Vikings defense absolutely annihilates any chance of Levis retaining this job. I could see 4 or 5 turnovers for Levis before he gets benched at halftime. It could be the worst game of the season against the Flores defense. So if that happens, Ridley will probably get shut down as well, and I could see a massive, massive downside for him in this game. There was a time period when the Vikings were actually the best matchup for receivers, and in the last 2 weeks, they have fallen down to number 6, but still giving up an average of 30 points per game in the last 5 games. So with 7 touchdowns, there is some upside here still on the board for Ridley, but you expect it to only come in garbage time. I don't think they'll be that competitive in this matchup. It could be a terrible spot. So similar to guys like Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Tank Dell, yeah, there's a lot of upside here, but there's also some risk. I don't think they're like the safest starts in general, but ranked top 20, I think you are starting them this week. Wide receiver 2s, in my opinion, 10 targets is enough to keep starting. Number 21 is Ladd McConkey versus Cincinnati, and I really like this matchup for Justin Herbert. The Bengals have a good underrated run defense, but a pretty subpar secondary, and Herbert probably throws it a lot more in this matchup. There's potential it turns into a shootout. So that's where the upside factors in for McConkey, but he's actually been a pretty good floor play in general. He has 2 touchdowns the last 4 weeks, but they happen in the same game, and that opens the ceiling. But aside from that, he still gives you 68 yards per game on about 4.5 catches, 5.5 targets. Isn't a lot, but it is the most of all Chargers receivers. If you're starting one Chargers receiver, it should be Ladd McConkey. He's definitely the safest go-to guy for Herbert. So I think he's a good start this week. I think there's some high upside. It's just a question of, will Quentin Johnston or Josh Palmer vulture him for that touchdown? Hopefully that doesn't happen, but he's been a top 16 receiver over the last 4 games, averaging 12.1 points per game, does rank tied with Drake London in that sample size. So I think he's a good start. I'm definitely trusting Justin Herbert this week. I think it's a good spot for McConkey to enter your lineup. At wide receiver 21, he's a very high-end flex play against the Bengals. Number 22, I have Courtland Sutton versus Atlanta, and the Falcons are a top 8 matchup. There could be very high potential for Courtland Sutton, but there's still Bo Nix under center, but at this point, it shouldn't worry you at all. Bo Nix has proven that he gets Sutton the ball at a high rate. With Josh Reynolds on IR, Bo Nix has focused a lot more on Sutton in this offense, and in the last 8 games since week 3, Courtland Sutton has at least 10 fantasy points in 6 of them. There was a bagel against the Saints, but that was a weird game plan on Thursday night, and I'm willing to write it off as a fluke and not worry about it. I think Sutton is pretty safe and trustworthy in general. While he's not getting it done like last year with a shit ton of touchdowns, it's more so a repeatable formula for success. 73 yards per game, only 1 touchdown the last 4 weeks on 7.5 targets, 5.3 catches, 11.4 points is about 10 if you take out the touchdown. So I trust Sutton, honestly. I think he's a very safe option. And given the matchup is top 10, I think he is a plus start this week. Definitely a top 25 option at the worst. So start Courtland Sutton. I trust him against the Falcons. Number 23 and 24, I have 2 Packers receivers, Romeo Doubs and Jayden Reed. And Doubs is right behind Sutton in terms of fantasy points on average his last 4 games. An average of 11.3 points per game on 6.3 targets, 4.5 catches, 61 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He is the number 1 target for Jordan Love as of late. But Jayden Reed has kind of fallen off a little bit. In his last 4 games, he's only wide receiver 43, averaging 8.5 points. He's on par with guys like Tyreek Hill and Tank Dell. But we know the upside with Jayden Reed. We saw like 30-point games from him to start the season, and at some point his explosiveness will come back to him. So I view the two kind of the same. There's multiple touchdown upside. You could get 20 points from either of them in the right matchup, but picking the correct Packers receiver is always kind of Russian roulette. It could be Dontavian Wicks or Christian Watson, even Bo Melton potentially any given game. Tucker Kraft also is a factor. So good luck picking the right guy. If I was taking one, it would be Romeo Doubs. I think he has the safer floor given a higher target share. The bust potential with Romeo Doubs is a bit diminished thanks to those targets. But Jayden Reed is equally as valuable in my opinion. I know he's been less efficient lately, but at any point he could be a top 5 receiver on the week. So I would start both of these guys. I think starting 2 of them every week is usually the way to go. Last season, Romeo Doubs had a really good game against them. In week 1, 2023, he had 16.6 points, 5 targets, 4 catches, 26 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He only played 48% of snaps, and that was the first game with Jordan Love as the clear starter. So kind of emblematic of how long it's been since Love has trusted him the most, but there are some other games where he disappears. So he's healthy. I think he is the safest option. And Jaden Reed should have some work in the run game to offer some upside as well. So never going to bet against these two guys that much. I think while they don't have like the safest floors, the upside is too high. They are decent flex plays every week. Number 25, I have Davante Adams versus the Colts, who is questionable technically, but I do expect him to play. He is a veteran, so monitor the practice reports, but odds are Adams will be fine. And he is averaging 9.2 points per game in his last 4 with the Jets, 9.8 targets, 5 catches, 52 yards, and a touchdown. The volume is always there. Last week, he had 13 targets, but only caught 6 of them for 31 yards against Arizona. That was terrible. And at that point, just let some of those targets go to guys like Garrett Wilson and other players. So very annoying. He was terrible last week. The entire offense was garbage. So against the Colts defense, it doesn't scare you at all. I think it will be a more decent showing for the Jets offense in general. And it is possible that Rodgers locks onto him once again. So inevitably, the deep shot touchdown will hit, and that's what you're hoping for with Adams, but I definitely prefer Garrett Wilson. I do trust him a bit more. Number 26, I also think you're starting DeVonta Smith versus Washington, who also, similar to A.J. Brown, plays very well in this matchup. Not as good. A.J. Brown averages 26 plus points against the Commanders. Meanwhile, DeVonta averages 15.5 in his last 5 games versus Washington. 8.4 targets, 6.2 catches, 88 yards per game with 3 touchdowns in this sample size. So usually plays well, usually does pay off in fantasy, but the matchup has been a big downgrade lately. They've really turned it around on defense, and I could envision a scenario where only Saquon and A.J. Brown have valuable fantasy games this week. The offense has not always sustained all 3 guys every week. So there are going to be some weird games where that doesn't happen, but Smith still has very high upside. Just like DeVonta Smith, he could go over 20 points and you wouldn't be shocked. So a deep touchdown is looming, and without it, you still probably get like 60 plus yards. Smith is a fine option, definitely still worth a start, but in this matchup, it has been a downgrade lately. I only rank him as a mid-level flex play on Thursday. Number 27 is DK Metcalf at San Francisco, and you're probably thinking, why is he ranked so low? I do not understand. Why do you hate DK Metcalf? Well, first off, he's questionable. He's missed the last 2 games before the bye. He was not healthy. Odds are he suits up, but he may not be 100%. And he also sucks in this matchup. The Niners usually shut him down. Divisional opponents that lock up specific players are matchups I look out for, and I've mentioned it in the past. Even in week 6, I ranked him lower than usual against San Francisco. So I really don't think he's a good start this week, just a mid-level flex play. The volume will be there. In week 6, he had 11 targets against the Niners. But you know what he did on those 11 targets? He only caught 3 of them for 48 yards. 6.3 points was dog shit. So that is what I'm worried about for Metcalf. Maybe the touchdown does save him this time, but in general, he is not good against San Francisco. His last 5 regular season games versus the Niners, he is averaging 7.5 points on 8 targets, 3.8 catches, 44 yards per game, and only 1 touchdown in that sample size. If you look at the playoff game, though, he did have 136 yards, 2 touchdowns in that playoff game. That's a different environment, however, but maybe this game is a de facto playoff game for the Seahawks. If they lose this, there is no chance they win the division, and they probably miss the playoffs given the Cardinals are looking so good. So maybe, just maybe off the bye, Metcalf does turn it around, but in general, he is terrible in this matchup. It's also bottom 10 on the season. Tough spot in general, and he's only been wide receiver 28 in his last 4 games in the first place. DK Metcalf's not been that good. So I think he's overhyped. I think Geno is a big problem why you can't get good games from multiple Seahawks receivers every week. And this is probably going to be very frustrating yet again. I think Metcalf is bad in this game. So I would consider benching him, honestly, but at 27, given his target share, there is still that touchdown upside, and that's what I'm factoring in. At wide receiver 27, he's still in the flex conversation, but I'm worried about it. I think it could really burn you, and if I could, I'd rather avoid it and bench DK in this game. At 28, another player I'm pretty worried about, but I think I still probably start, would be Brian Thomas Jr. at Detroit. You're hoping for some garbage time. I think that's the only way it does work out. And Detroit does give up a lot of yards to receivers. They rank as a top 7 matchup, actually, against the position, allowing 29 points per game thanks to 184 yards per game. Only 3 touchdowns, though, the last 5 weeks. In general, it is hard to find pay dirt as a receiver against Detroit. Last week, it was John Mechie, not Tank Dell. So if it does happen, it might be like Gabe Davis who finds pay dirt, and it could really be problematic for Brian Thomas. He got absolutely shut down by the Vikings last week, but we know they're a very difficult secondary in general as well. But they're also a team that gives up a lot of receiver yards, and they completely shut him down. It might just be Mac Jones that demolishes any fantasy value for Brian Thomas Jr. So I would be worried Mac Jones scares the shit out of me here, but there's a chance that maybe in the fourth quarter, even the third quarter, the lead is just so big that they just play prevent defense, and Brian Thomas does pay off. All he needs is like one deep shot to hit. So I still think he's an interesting top 30 option. I'm not completely panicking, but at number 28, he was a top 15 play before last week. So big downgrade for sure, definitely some risk, but like DK Metcalf, I think he's earned some cachet with name value and talent. I still think he's probably worth a start, but I understand if you think he's ranked too high. With Metcalf, though, you probably think I'm too low. With Thomas, you probably think I'm too high. In my opinion, they're in the same tier. Number 29, I have Khalil Shakir versus the Chiefs, who's a perennial floor play. I rank him like 25 to 30 every single week, it feels like, because that's what he normally offers. He's wide receiver 26 over the last 4 games, and it's not thanks to any touchdowns at all. It's all based on his floor of about 10.5 points. Every week, he's averaging 71 yards on about 7 catches most of the time. He is a reliable check down slot receiver in Buffalo. Josh Allen trusts him tremendously, but there's never that like elite ceiling with Shakir. You're going to need a touchdown for it to pay off. And against the Chiefs, it's definitely not a good matchup for that to happen. So last season, in 2 regular season games, he was terrible, a maximum of 1 catch for 14 yards against Kansas City. But in the playoffs, he was great. 13.9 points, 9 targets, 7 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown. You're going to need that touchdown, though, to get anything of value over 10 points from Shakir this week. So I understand that Coleman is out. Cooper might not play. Kincaid might not play either. But still, I think Shakir is just going to be the steady, reliable, same old, 7 catches, 65, 70 yards. You'll get 9 points, but I don't think you get 12 plus from Shakir. The touchdown is not a safe bet. Number 30 is Jauan Jennings versus Seattle, who gets a top 3 matchup. On paper, it's definitely a spot to plug him in, but I worry that some of the usage last week was game matchup dependent, and in this game, they're going to pivot heavily to Deebo Samuel like they did last time they faced off against Seattle the first time. If you recall, against Arizona the week prior, Brandon Ayuk had a ton of targets, double digits, his best game of the season. Deebo was barely involved, and then the following week, Deebo was amazing, but Ayuk did like nothing. That was Thursday. This is a Sunday game, so I still expect Jennings to be involved. And in my opinion, he's clearly the number 2 receiver above Ricky Pearsall. Purdy really trusts him this season, but Pearsall will get better every single week. He is a first-round pick after all, and Jennings will not always see 11 targets like he did last week, but that type of volume is why I'm trusting him. I want to see it one more time, though. It could just be a bit of a fluke given they're setting up Deebo to be the wide receiver 1 this week, in my opinion. So I think it'll rotate who gets the most targets, but all options in San Francisco will play well. I even think Pearsall is a legit flex play as well. But if I was picking between the two, I do have Jennings in a tier higher. I trust him a lot more. If he gets another 10 targets, though, next week, I'd probably rank him inside the top 20, guaranteed. Number 31, I have Jakobi Meyers at Miami, and I'm pretty underwhelmed anytime I have to think about starting Jakobi Meyers, but he's actually a top 20 receiver the last 4 games, averaging 11.6 points per game on 9.3 targets, 6.3 catches, 70 yards per game, and 1 touchdown. I could be underestimating him a lot, but I'd like to see it with Desmond Ridder before I completely buy in. I still don't actually trust this offense. It's only going to Brock Bowers and Jakobi Meyers, though. When they throw it, there are no other options to consider. So Meyers' volume should continue, but will they be catchable with Ridder? I am not quite sure. I still worry about any actual upside from Meyers. It's usually just yards and catches, and although he's bust proof, I think he's a fine start. I view him pretty much in the same tier as like Khalil Shakir, but given the offense he's in a tier below. Shakir has more upside in Buffalo. Meyers in Vegas is a bit buried. So at 31, he's considerable, but probably not the most exciting player. I'd rather bench him if I could, but you're not going to get screwed. That's for sure. I think he's a safe play if you are in this situation. Go ahead if you have to. Number 32 and 33, I have JSN and Tyler Lockett of the Seahawks. Back to back, I do think JSN deserves to be ranked higher this week because he has stepped up the last couple games we've seen him. He was way better with no DK Metcalf, but I really don't trust that to repeat with Metcalf healthy. That's what I'm expecting, and I just don't think Geno is good enough to keep both guys involved every single week. And this is a weird matchup against the Seahawks. Historically, they shut down some of their better receivers, and Tyler Lockett plays very well, at least a lot better than Metcalf in this spot. In his last 5 games versus San Francisco, Tyler Lockett is averaging 11.3 points per game, 7.8 targets, 5.8 catches, 72 yards, and 1 touchdown. He scored last time in week 6 against the Niners again, and I could see him paying off once more as the best fantasy option in this matchup, so I think he's a legit flex consideration this week. At 33, I think Lockett is still viable from a floor standpoint, but I do think JSN has earned more trust, and at some point it will pivot. After the bye, you would expect the younger player to get more established in the offense. So with Metcalf coming back, it's not going to be great for JSN, but it should be okay. And I still think they'll be competitive for the most part. I think they stay within a touchdown of the Niners in this game. So in terms of yards per game, Geno is like the leading passer in the NFL this year. So that is a factor. I think JSN will have a decent floor, and so will Lockett. It's just a question of who scores the touchdown. It probably goes back to Metcalf, given he was so frustrated last time around. So I would consider starting all 3 of them, but I think they're all just flex plays this week. Lockett and JSN are on the lower end of the spectrum. Metcalf is not that much ahead of them, though. Only like 6 spots higher in my ranks than Lockett. Number 34, I have Josh Downs at the Jets, who I was ranking top 20 the last few weeks, but with Flacco, it's way more trustworthy for Josh Downs that those targets are actually catchable compared to Richardson. And we know for a fact Richardson will get the start this week. They've benched Flacco, who's played poorly. It makes sense. And Downs is a bit more of a liability in that scenario, especially with Michael Pittman not expected to play, at least in my opinion, not ranking him yet. That is a tougher test for Downs. There's more attention on Pittman when he's active, and Downs is not good enough to be like a matchup-proof receiver. Against the Jets, it is a big downgrade. So I do worry about it. There's also the potential that even when he does get targets, they're way over his head and Richardson completely misses him. But there's also potential that an 80-yard house call does hit. We've seen that happen in the past with Downs and Richardson. So I still think he's an interesting floor play. The volume should still be there, but without the touchdown, I don't think he goes over 10 points. I think he's only safe for about 8 or 9 this week against the Jets. At 35, I have Amari Cooper versus the Chiefs, and he's probably one of the last players I think has a decent floor and some flex consideration. Against the Chiefs, they're definitely going to need him, but he's missed the last 2 games with a wrist injury. He may not play. He might not be active. So monitor his practice reports. We will update this rank on Saturday, but if he does play, I think he's in the start consideration for sure. I kind of want to rank him higher than Shakir because at least we've seen him score some touchdowns in this offense, albeit his only game we've seen him at all. So Amari Cooper is not safe to play, and it's still a question what his chemistry is with Josh Allen. They have not practiced much together this year. So it could be a problem, but odds are they're going to need him a lot. If he is active, I think similar to DeAndre Hopkins, he could play very well. That's what he's done in the past, but it was all stats with the Raiders in his career. The last time he played against Kansas City, he actually went over 200 yards, but that was back in 2017 with Las Vegas. So not reading into any matchup stats, but this is a bit of a rivalry, and anything can happen. So it could be a low-scoring game. It could be a shootout. We'll find out. But Amari Cooper at 35 is dependent on health. I'll update this rank for sure on Saturday, even above Khalil Shakir if active. Number 36 is Jameson Williams versus Jacksonville, and last week was encouraging. It wasn't boom bust. He actually went over 50 yards, but no touchdown. He was more involved from a target standpoint. And off his suspension, that's nice to see. He's not in the doghouse entirely. They still need him in order to win most of the time. But against the Jags, it could go to anyone else and they'll win comfortably. So there is potential he isn't needed in the second half once they establish a heavy lead. But in general, he always offers like elite upside. He could give you 20 points as well. So too high upside to ignore. I still think he's worth some flex consideration, but obviously he's a boom bust option. If he does not hit that 40-yard touchdown, you probably get less than 7 points. So some risk reward with Jameson to consider, but at 36, if you're interested, he's not a bad bet at all. The Jags don't scare you whatsoever. Ricky Pearsall comes in at 37, the matchup's top 3, but he's pretty dependent on deep touchdowns as well. Last week, that did work out for him. The Yak saved his fantasy day, but it's not going to happen all the time. He is definitely the number 3 receiver. He is behind Jauan Jennings, and this week I do think Deebo steps back into that number 1 receiver role. So there may not be enough room to fit in Pearsall to the game plan. Like, he might not get more than 3 targets just because there's so many other mouths to feed. So he's a bit risky, but I understand starting him regardless. He has a lot of upside, and I like his talent. He's looked really good in limited game action. So as a rookie, he will get better week to week. He's a first-round pick for a reason, and with no Ayuk, he could overtake Jennings by the time we hit Thanksgiving. Number 38, I have DJ Moore versus Green Bay, and DJ's been terrible the last 4 games. I think this is definitely where I'm benching players. He is beyond the cutoff point. I am not starting DJ Moore at all this week. He's been atrociously bad. No touchdowns have not helped either, but only 29 yards per game the last month. He has been ass. So I think he's in the doghouse, at least in my fantasy lineup. I have no desire to start him at all. And he gets a terrible matchup against the Packers. They rank bottom 3, and he also sucked against them last year. With Justin Fields, when he had no other target competition, he was dog shit. He averaged 6 points per game in 2 games with Chicago last season against Green Bay. 4 targets, 3 catches, 45 yards, and no touchdowns. I don't even think he'll be that good in this game against Jair Alexander. So I'm not starting him. I understand they just fired the offensive coordinator, and maybe Caleb Williams turns it around. But until I see it, I have no confidence at all. I can't even tell you with a straight face that he's their actual number 1 receiver. It's been Keenan Allen in fantasy, who's been better the last month thanks to 2 touchdowns in London, but Rome Odunze has had the most yards of all 3 players, and the target share is not that different between each player. It's still kind of similar with each one. So it's just contract that makes you think DJ is still the guy, but he's been very unmotivated, very pissed off lately. And if that rumor that they want Bagent to start is true, that there's a veteran that wants that to happen, I think it would be him. I can't think of another veteran player who would actually care about what's happening at quarterback and want Tyson Bagent. Like, that makes no sense at all. So if that's the case, then maybe Caleb moves off of him and looks elsewhere for a week. I think DJ is a liability. I would definitely bench him this week against the Packers. I have no faith at all. I'm going to need to see it multiple weeks to trust him once again. I honestly feel too high at 38. Number 39 and 40, I have Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore of the Browns back-to-back, and the matchup against the Saints is top 5, but all the touchdowns for Jameis Winston are going towards Cedric Tillman. So that caps both players' upside, but over the last 3 games, they've both seen a very high target share. Jeudy did overtake him in Week 9 before the Week 10 bye, but over the course of those 3 games, Elijah Moore does see more targets on average. They both average about 5 or so catches for 50-ish yards. Jeudy is more efficient on his catches, though, and he is slightly safer in my opinion. But they're both been pretty decent, pretty similar to one another. And while I'm definitely trusting Tillman by far above them, I do think one of them has legit value rest of season. I think if they are on the waiver wire, go ahead and pick them up. Jameis should continue to throw it in their direction. He's not getting David Njoku involved enough to limit their target share. So I think they're both interesting. It's a matter of will they find the end zone or not for like true high ceiling, but the floor should be good. I think both offer about 7.5, 8 or so points. They're not the worst floor plays you could find, but only one of them, not both, are decent. And that's where there's too much risk to actually trust either. I think until we get more clarity, more of a sample size, I'm leaning towards Judy, but I can't say that definitively. At 41, I have Alec Pierce at the Jets, and at this point, you know exactly what you're chasing if you are starting Alec Pierce. But assuming Michael Pittman doesn't start, Pierce is now the number 2 receiver. Although A.D. Mitchell did look better last week, I still think Pierce is more established and a bit safer. With the pivot to Richardson, I think Pierce has more of a connection already established with Richardson. And you know you're just hoping for a deep shot to hit, but that's where most of them have happened this season. When Richardson does connect, it's usually to Pierce down the field. But it could be Dobbs, it could be A.D. Mitchell, it could be anyone else. It could even be Ashton Dulin. For all we know, it could not happen at all. So big boom bust, high risk, high reward with Pierce. But if it hits, you could get 20 points. He could win you the week. So why not at 41? At this point, we're just chasing upside. And same applies with Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer back to back. The two Chargers lower end receivers are interesting against the Bengals because could turn into a shootout. You know, the Bengals offense is high flying, and maybe their run defense really limits J.K. Dobbins. So I think Herbert is a good start this week, and somebody other than McConkey probably steps up, but the volume is not that safe to trust. Neither player is seeing more than 5 targets per game, but they are scoring touchdowns at a decent rate. So I prefer Quentin Johnston. He scored more touchdowns this season, but Palmer is averaging 19 yards per catch. When he does get a target, it is usually deep down the field. So it could turn into a touchdown. There's always some high upside. When they do score, sometimes they give you 12 points on just one play. So look out for them, but I think only Ladd McConkey is safe enough to trust. I don't think there's enough safe volume projected for either of these guys. Very touchdown dependent, and it could go to either one. If you put a gun to my head, I'd go with QJ over Palmer. Number 44, I have Rashod Bateman at Pittsburgh, who does sometimes hit on that deep shot. It happened last week, but against the Steelers, could be rough. He's had very poor games against them, a maximum of 10 yards in 3 career games against the Steelers. So could happen again, but obviously he's been better lately, so could be a big game for him. There's shootout potential if the Ravens offense can get going, but historically Lamar Jackson gets shut down by Mike Tomlin's defense, and that's why I'm going to pass on Bateman. Yeah, the upside is tempting, but if it doesn't hit, you will get burned. I don't trust it this week against the Steelers. In the same game, though, it's very tempting to chase the Ravens matchup. It is the best on paper in the NFL. So Mike Williams is tempting. We saw a house call for him last week. That moonshot rainbow pass from Russell Wilson is a beauty. It won't happen all the time, but it is still in the arsenal, and it looks like Mike Williams is a potential candidate for that to hit. I like this matchup for him. I think it's interesting. All he needs is one, but obviously if it doesn't happen, you will get screwed and you'll be pissed. I recommended him. So balance the risk, but at 45, you could do worse. The matchup says go for it. Number 46, I have Xavier Worthy at Buffalo, and if you're going for it, why not look to the speedy 4-2 receiver? But obviously he's been bad. Averaging 4.1 points is a liability without the touchdown. So if he doesn't step out of bounds, then maybe it happens, but obviously it could not happen at all. I think with Juju coming back, you probably avoid it. More than likely, I would pass on Worthy. Number 47, I think I'm passing on Waddle for sure. Bottom 2 matchup, I only think Tyreek Hill has any shot in your lineup. Number 48, I have Christian Watson, who at this point you're really desperate, but who knows, could be the option in the Packers receiving core. It's just, do you feel lucky enough to start him? That's really the only reason to consider him. And same goes with MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling versus Cleveland. He had 2 deep touchdowns last week, and for some reason, Derek Carr is great on play action. So maybe it happens again. The matchup's actually top 2. The Browns give up 189 yards and 8 touchdowns to receivers the last 5 games, but they may have turned it around after the bye. Probably not, though. So this matchup feels wasted on the Saints with all their injuries. MVS is the only one to consider, but obviously, just like all these other boom-bust players, buyer beware, you could absolutely get a bagel. Number 50, though, is Demarcus Robinson, who has 4 touchdowns in his last 3 games. And last week it did dry up. Not a single player scored a touchdown for the Rams last week. So maybe they're going to look elsewhere, but maybe they go back to him in the red zone. It's possible. I still think he could score 4 touchdowns in the remaining 8 games. So could happen this week. That's what you're hoping for. Without it, it will be bad as well. So that's what you're managing the risk-reward ratio at this point. But these last 10, I'm just going to list. Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze maybe step up with a new OC, but until we see it, can't trust either. I don't even trust DJ Moore, honestly. Addison does not get enough volume as Darnold loses some confidence. I think you can't trust anyone other than Jefferson. Demario Douglas looks like the number 1 receiver, but still not enough faith in any Patriots options yet. Number 55 is Mac Hollins, who should probably step up with all the injuries in Buffalo. Maybe I'm underranking him at 55, but probably not safe. At 56, you don't feel safe with Wicks either. And Nick Westbrook-Akine has 4 touchdowns the last 5 games, but last week it dried up with Will Levis. It's not a safe bet at all. 58 is Devon Valet, who has stepped up a little bit lately, but really hoping for a touchdown here. Juju comes back onto the field and not ready to trust him yet with Hopkins there, but there is some upside. And then lastly, Calvin Austin in that Ravens matchup I mentioned with Mike Williams, maybe one of those deep shot hits. Austin is speedy, so we're just chasing the best matchup with him. Wanted to mention him, but you could put anyone here like Deontay Johnson, Jalen Tolbert, John Mechie, A.D. Mitchell, Curtis Samuel are all honorable mentions for wide receiver 60 as well. So that's it for this video. Here are my rankings at the position, the top 60 here on the screen. And I feel excellent about the top 7. I think they're all must-start locks in your lineup. You would expect about 20 points from all of them. But George Pickens is the start of the week in the next tier, and against the Ravens, you want to start every receiver you can. So Pickens will dominate. He's a top 10 play, and I think everyone from him all the way down to Calvin Ridley, I think, are locks in your lineup. I think either the volume, the matchup, or just the situation and recent success for them are all reasons to trust them. I think they are worth starting this week in your lineup. All top 20 plays should probably go over 12 plus fantasy points. But starting with Ladd McConkey, I think we entered the flex conversation, and it kind of dries up with Jauan Jennings. I think 20 through 30 are all interesting flex plays, but a bit touchdown dependent in general. They should be fine. I still think they're worth starting, more so than like running backs I have ranked outside the top 25. That's for sure. But I do think there is some risk factoring in with this tier, but I would still start them. I still expect at least 9 points from them. Starting with Jakobi Meyers, though, I think we are getting a bit more desperate and underwhelmed for the most part. But I think all the way through Ricky Pearsall, you still have legitimate arguments to make why you should be starting them. I still think they have some legit upside, and the bet is not that terrible. So those are the starts this week. The top 37, I think, all give you at least 9-10 points. Starting with DJ Moore, though, I think you are benching those players, and it does become very, very tricky to actually trust. I would rather avoid it. Starting with DJ Moore, 8 points would be my max projection. Moving past that point. So good luck to you. If you still have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm happy to answer them. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. My name is Adam Riancho. I will see you next time, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.